Hey, I am live on I always say Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and on YouTube. I am Dr. Messina Morris, and these are my Sunday afternoon STEM thoughts. So I was thinking about my entire education, and my education was a very lengthy one. I went to school for 24 years straight. And for 12 years, I was in K 12. And 4 years after that, I got an undergraduate degree in which I did a super advanced level educational process at Clark Atlanta University. I was in a bachelor's master's program, and I took 23 credit hours my first semester in college. And it was an honors program. And then I went to Emory University, but I had other options. I got into 7 other graduate schools, including Vanderbilt and Northwestern and University of Michigan and so many more. And my choice was Emory because my advisor, Dr. Justice, who I ended up working for, studied neurochemistry, and I was very interested in the brain because my brother Gordy had spinal meningitis and it left him brain damage at the age of 4. And I wanted to do work that aligned where I would get coursework in neuropsychopharmacology as I did, and things about drug addiction research, which I did, and things about the just neuroscience and biochemistry, which was not like what I did. Hey, Black Neurodoc, how you doing? Um, but I say this to say that somewhere along the lines of STEM education and being a professor now at Morehouse College and having been there 11 years, but having been K-12 certified and taught chemistry and physical science, I've seen such a disconnect from science in just the greater American population that it worries me because I know just knowing science isn't enough. And there's so many gaps that I try to stand in, but I'm just one person, right? So currently, we're in a world that is driven by innovation, AI, biotech, renewable energy, material science, and yet we still face this recurring paradox. We teach a lot of science, but not too many people can apply it meaningfully and apply it to high impact roles that actually transform the world. And so I call that a leaking STEM pipeline. Talent is not lost at the beginning, but in the transitions from theory to practice, school to work, discipline to interdiscipline. Today, I want to talk about where the disconnect lies and how we can actually reclaim that lost potential. So it's not enough as much as parents want to think about it. I know they're parents of Generation Alpha babies and Generation Beta babies and some end of Gen Z babies that think STEM education and I'm going to take them to the STEM workshop and that's enough. But now, if your STEM workshop isn't integrating things like AI and biotech and advanced manufacturing and semiconductors and talking about more than just even code, then the promise and the illusion is not adding up. So there's so many promises that are made about STEM, and then there's this illusion that exists. So we like to imagine this simple supply and demand. The world needs more STEM workers, so we invest in more science education, but that's not the complete story. Literally in 2021, about 24% of the US workforce was employed in STEM occupations. That's about 36.8 million workers. But more than half of those, they didn't have bachelor's degrees. So many STEM roles are middle skill and not doctoral lab roles. But we push our students to matriculate to the doctorate. There's nothing wrong with that. I have my doctorate. But when you think about the jobs that are in the workforce, the US Department of Labor actually estimates that there are 16 million skilled technical jobs, many of which require STEM related competencies, but they demand associate degrees or certifications rather than bachelor's and master's and PhDs. And so I am in higher education, which makes me think, am I doing the right thing? Now, I do sit in the Division of Professional and Continuing Studies, which means that people who want to come and upskill themselves and students who want to get certified in particular areas will be building that bridge to help with the talent pipeline, because many of our scholars, I heard a report today that 10%, approximately 10% of scholars who graduate with bachelor's degrees are unemployed and can't find work for 2 years or more in their field of study. And so that just doesn't affect STEM, but you have looming shortages in certain industries, and there's no talent pipeline for it. So you think about the semiconductor industry, right? We need to power all of these machines that we use. I'm into my VR, my extended reality. Well, all of them have a chip. I mean, I'm on a computer, I'm talking to you now. It has a chip. Semiconductors are really important. Material science is really important. What's going to be our next energy source? What's going to be the new medicine that keeps us healthy enough to be able to work in these new environments? The pollution is different. The environment is different. The way that we live is different. What type of nutrition will we need? I mean, there are so many other things. But anyway, I digress. You have looming shortages in the semiconductor industry. There are about 115,000 new jobs now. You think about those jobs needing to be filled by 2030, and they're already forecasting that there'll be a shortfall of about 67,000, simply because we don't have qualified candidates to take on those jobs. So demand is growing, but just because you're producing science graduates doesn't guarantee that there's alignment with that demand. We still have communities that strongly believe that a smart child in science should be a medical doctor, and a smart child in language, or a child that debates or has a big voice, should be a lawyer. Those are two career pathways. Those are not the only career pathways, but there's no real education for parents that are looking to understand what should they do to mold their children in a way that is going to give them a fruitful future. So this conversation is very important to me as a mother of 5 sons and children who are in the workforce, children who will be entering the workforce in the next 2 to 3 years, children who will have a different work alternative because they have a child that has autism. And so trying to find an inclusive workplace is also going to be extremely important. And then I have a Generation Alpha baby who's 8 years old, and what the future of work looks like for him is totally different. But when we start thinking about this pipeline, we start thinking about multiple leaks. Early interest is waning. In middle school, most girls take a huge turn and decide that they're no longer interested in science. And then the ones that are end up being the only ones in the high school classroom, the only ones in college, the only ones in graduate school. excuse me, until they get into the workforce. Now, I worked in completely male dominated fields, obviously, with the biomolecular chemistry degree and with um, my experience in technology. To be quite honest, I never really thought that much about it because I knew that it was something that I was interested in and that I needed to do in order to be successful in my life. So I never quite thought about this is a completely male dominated field. Not in that way, but it does make me wonder why so many people have left the field, because I went to school with beautiful women who are no longer in STEM, and I stayed the course in STEM. And even my colleagues that are in STEM have changed trajectories just because of the lack of promotion and promise in STEM areas, and or have dropped out of the workforce. But anyway, I digress. When we start to talk about where knowledge alone fails, there's several different leaks. So the first leak, early interest strains. Half of US students actually lose interest in STEM by age 12. So we need to start doing something earlier. I have a friend by the name of Victor Hicks who owns Coding with Culture. He's the founder and he does amazing work. STEM NOLA with Dr. Calvin Mackey, amazing work with early STEM fellows and young kids. There are several other communities like Dr. Maxine Kane that works with STEM Women in Atlanta, and she works with young girls at Coretta Scott King Academy, and they do fabulous work. There's so many people that are trying to reinvigorate the community in these early interests. I even do Super Science Saturdays where I do neurotypical and neurodiverse students that come together um, for young kids, kids as young as I've done 4, all the way up to high school. So there are people that are trying to do it, but they can't do it alone. So if half of US students lose interest in STEM by age 12, then that means many never even imagine themselves as scientists or engineers or technologists. And so this problem is actually worse for girls and underrepresented minorities because of a lack of STEM identity. And so even when I'm teaching in virtual reality and I'm teaching different STEM lessons to different scholars at different ages, one of my major things is to get them to create their avatar in the likeness of someone that represents a STEM field, whether it is an agriculturist or a scientist that is a chemist or a nuclear physicist, or somewhere, some way, want them to feel like they are empowered to be the astronaut. So showing their avatar presence in an actual spacesuit. But there are also not enough role models, but that's because the pipeline has been leaking. And there's so many, this is not for me. I don't know why I would do this. And there's so much about the science areas that are antiquated that it does not pique interest because it's not relevant to so many people. I actually was trying to design a chemistry course on yesterday, and as I was looking through resources for doing so, I was sorely disappointed that the same language is being used that was used when I started studying chemistry to explain concepts that even related back to real world application, things that actually don't and aren't relevant to right now. So there were numerous examples of STEM as it stood as if the world was stuck in like 1985. or even before that. And I was very disheartened because I found a way. It wasn't um, because there was so much interest. I found ways to play uh, with my imagination, to be who I am. So that is something that our children aren't. I don't know that they have enough free time in their minds to imagine themselves as something that they don't see enough of. But anyway, there's also a second leap with teachers and pedagogical approaches. So the pipeline depends on strong STEM teachers, but the production of new STEM teachers has dropped. I remember they were even giving bonuses of like $5,000 a year in the state of Georgia to you if you were a new teacher between years 1 and 3. So you got another $5,000 a year to stay in the field. That didn't deter many people from leaving, though. But there were 31,000 STEM teachers a decade ago, and now it's about 20,000 in recent years. And many teachers teaching chemistry, physics, and engineering actually weren't chemists or physicists or engineers and may have taken one course in either of the subjects and have limited ongoing professional development or connections to research and practice. They're limited programs that actually bring teachers in to give them real world scientific experience so that they could then go deep in their classroom and make it relevant with the content that they are actually delivering to students. And so school has become much of a blur for many students. And then the third leap would be a fragmented curriculum and isolated theories. So you have these siloed communities of STEM where students learn biology, chemistry, physics, math, but they don't learn the integration of them. They don't apply them in messy real world contexts. They don't see the cross disciplinarity or the interdisciplinarity of the subjects. And so when you start looking at different studies over the 2010s to 2015, there's a study that compared job relevant workplace data to educational frameworks and found that existing STEM education models fail to cover many of the competencies that workers actually need. It's as if people sat in committee and had these conversations in isolation and didn't think about what these key skills were that the students would need and how to then tailor them back so that they are relevant in the actual classroom. So education has become much of a farce. It's been much of a big joke to our students who realize, I don't even need this. So you have 18 key skills, 7 knowledge categories, and 27 work activities identified as critical in many of the STEM jobs, but not represented in curriculum frameworks. And you even have a misalignment in graduate STEM education that I do know. Many PhD programs still prepare students for academic research roles, even though only 20% of PhDs across STEM fields will actually land tenure track academic positions. So many graduates enter these alternative careers and they have no formal training that is geared towards those pathways. But if those alternative careers are now becoming the major careers, then what do we really need to do? The fourth biggest leak is confidence, STEM identity, persistence, and retention. Even among students with strong preparation, there are disparities in confidence. The imposter syndrome does really exist. There are disparities in this confidence that affect their persistence. You have many STEM people who burn out. They've been on a fast track towards STEM. I know what that feels like, always being directed in a particular area because you have that genius, but there's no real community. There's no real support system, and there's no real preparation for the isolation that it takes to be great in those areas. And so, if you think about the statistics, women are 1.5 times more likely than men to lead the STEM path. They often cite lack of confidence rather than lack of competence. I'm gonna let that sit there. And then when you think about the amount that education costs, that also plays a role. Why take on $200,000 worth of debt in order to get this education and only get a $40,000 a year job? Because they start paying on the state level assistant professors in STEM, biology, chemistry, physics, math, about $48,000 to $56,000. They might have gone up a little bit over the years, but I know when I was department chair, it wasn't that much. And so you have all of this lack of payoff for the amount of education that you have to endure. And so usually if you have family to take care of, something happens during a lifetime or spectrum of your matriculation that throws you off course, an illness perhaps even, then you stop and you work in another field. It might even be adjacent to what you wanted to do, but it's never exactly what you wanted to do. So even by the time someone graduates with excellent grades, that person might not have the hybrid, integrative, adaptive, cross-disciplinary skills that the workforce even wants. So you'll have this singular, siloed degree that you can't use. And it's a real thing. Also, what does the workforce actually need? What do employers actually say they want? And what gaps are they actually reporting? A lot of soft or transferable skills. My 4 C's I always talk about: communication, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking. I throw in compassion because if you don't have any emotional intelligence or empathy, and now digital empathy, then you are not a great candidate for many, many, many jobs that deal with a lot of different people and teams. So, employers actually want and see gaps in these soft or transferable skills of communication, collaboration, project management, critical thinking, adaptability, and systems thinking, the ability to work across disciplines. So these cross-functional teams, they're not just in a job description, the companies actually want them. They need them. So if you have a biotech company that needs someone who can understand biology, but also data science and engineering, then you're kind of on the outs. There's not that many people that have those competencies or even have that interest that went and did the specific research to upskill themselves and get certifications in those areas besides their singular degree, because people really think that that degree is enough. So domain specific technical competence is necessary, but it's insufficient. So many jobs actually require coding, data analytics, or instrumentation skills that aren't typically taught in standard science courses. One, because that stuff is expensive. That's why we teach in virtual reality, because then you can have access to different instrumentation that is necessary. That was really important for us as a chemistry department when I was in chemistry at Morehouse. So that was really important to make sure that students had access to do experiments that they do or to visualize the molecular world in a way that they otherwise could not. There are fast-moving sectors like AI, everyone knows, materials and energy, where workers actually need capacity to continuously learn. So just having that bandwidth to pivot, to teach themselves, to integrate new knowledge that is literally real time, cutting edge, on the cusp, bleeding cutting edge. Many STEM jobs are not in labs. They're in operations or manufacturing and quality control and regulatory policy and product management. And the undergirding of a STEM education right now is not integrating business. Interestingly enough, when I was working on my PhD, I moonlighted as a business student working on an MBA in project management because I felt like, when I finish this PhD, they're going to throw me as somebody's supervisor or over somebody's lab. And I don't have a bit of knowledge on how to honestly run nothing but my house. I know how to run my house, but that's not running operations for a company. And so I front loaded my master's degree in business administration with the emphasis in project management, with marketing, organizational management, change management, project management, technical documentation and writing, and took the two project management sequences back to back. And I got halfway through and realized, wow, how many of us as PhDs really need this? And so when people see who I am today, it's a product of interest that said, I lack in this area. It's a certain level of self-awareness that I knew existed from me. And how do I level myself up to be better than anyone could actually make me? That is truly, truly important. So many STEM jobs are not in labs, but we train students to do labs specifically. You have sectors that are screaming for talent now. Semiconductor sector can't scale because there's not an available pipeline that can satisfy the demand. You think about cybersecurity, can't scale. There are 500,000 jobs available with a lack of supply in that area. National strategy documents emphasize that the United States will need approximately 1 million more STEM professionals than it's on track to actually produce in coming decades. And we actually outsource a lot of our STEM fields or jobs or talent to other countries, primarily India and China, because we don't have the domestic talent. That's a whole nother national security risk in itself, because the world is changing so rapidly and there is a race to become the first ever global power using AI in some way. So mastery of this textbook science is definitely not enough. And this mismatch is just, it's not, it's not just the amount of scientists that are needed. It's the fit. It's the actual education and knowledge that the scientists have. It's not matching up with what is needed. So let's just take these two students, okay? These are two graduates, let's just say. You have a summa cum laude scientist who graduates from a very prestigious institution in chemistry. She writes flawless reaction mechanisms, can derive kinetics, but struggled in her first lab. I understand this because she couldn't interpret instrumentation data. She couldn't communicate with engineers. She didn't understand how to manage project timelines. She was not able to integrate with a cross functional product team. She didn't have enough real world experience while she had enough theory. And so after 2 years, she actually leaves that lab job for a consulting or business role to learn how to apply the science that she was lauded for in undergraduate. I have another student, engineering major. His university offered a capstone plus industry immersion model. He worked on sensors for water quality, interfaced with environmental scientists, was mentored by industry professionals, learned to code, joined a startup, and over time becomes a bridge between R&D and operations. Why? Because he both understood science, but also systems. So you have two equally bright young people, but their journeys are different because one has structured exposure to practice and integrative skill building, but the other was largely confined to disciplinary depth without breadth or translation bridges. We see this all the time, and so many of our students who have degrees in STEM end up unemployed for long stints of time because they can't find the way that their degrees actually translate to the needs of the industry. So I tell students who are biology, chemistry, physics, mathematics majors, psychology, go do an internship, go do a research experience, go beg a company. You can work for free at this point, but you need to get your foot into a door with a real company that is doing the work, that even if you're not interested, it doesn't matter. You need to understand how these companies move, and the information that you're going to get there is going to drastically transform your education. So don't sit at home in summer. Don't even take extra classes, because why? Go to sit in someone's corporate lab or corporate job, doing an internship, go to someone's government facility and figure out what programs they have. Go to some academic, other education, not the school you go to right now. Go somewhere else and go work in their labs. Go shadow their professors. Go get real world experience. Go find an entrepreneur that's working in your industry or sector. Go work for a startup and just intern with them and learn how fast paced the work is. Develop that kind of work ethic over the summer, that kind of understanding. It would drastically change your educational outlook. So I have a few call to actions to repair this pipeline. I feel like we need to design with the end in mind. And there are some levers that we can pull, and we should. Early exposure plus sustained engagement. So a lot of times we introduce education to elementary school students and get them all excited, and then it wanes, and middle school is like a nothing. And then high school is even worse, because then you have a gap and students are not getting interested when it becomes more challenging. And then there's college, and by that time you've disenfranchised half of your learners. And so we need more mentorship. We need more maker spaces. We need more robotics programs, more project-based learning, well before middle school, but sustained through middle school and high school. We should empower and invest in STEM teachers. There's no reason why we shouldn't have real world professionals in our classrooms. Yes, there's a discipline problem in public schools, lots of them. Yes, there is a wage gap that exists for teachers. I know that for a fact. But there has to be a way that we can invest in our STEM teachers to boost professional development for those who are there, embed scientists into K-12, raise compensation, create career paths for teacher researchers. There's so many bright, I've worked with some of the like women that know science, men that know science, and yet there's like no real anything for their genius. We've got to expand the production of STEM qualified teachers. We need to redesign our curriculum, embed cross-discipline projects, systems thinking, data skills, computational tools, design thinking, and align pedagogical frameworks to workplace validated competencies. We need to use capstone plus internship or design innovation studio models early on in undergraduate, even in high school. There needs to be transparency in advising. There needs to be transparency in advising. There needs to be a re-education of counselors so that non-academic career options are more visible, so that the career center is not just serving students who are going into industries that are not of high demand because they don't know how to transfer the skills that the student is learning into those demand industries, so then they don't talk to the industry. I digress. Graduate programs must also evolve. It's great to know how to write a grant, but if there's no funding, then it's not. Finding out how to get government contracts, figuring out how to be your own entrepreneurial self, figuring out how to actually protect your intellectual property or the research that you are doing in order to run your own company might just be a necessary skill that a PhD could have, and people would take them seriously because they have the expertise. We have to bridge experiences. Companies, government labs, universities need to partner to give students these real world exposure, this experiential learning experiences, fund gap year research. Literally, students don't have to finish their degree in 4 years or 3 or 2, but they have to because a lot of them have to work. But if you had a gap year that was funded, where you could take a gap year and work in industry and do these micro internships instead of trying to do them for free and kind of get them all just smushed together, then you would be able to bridge these experiences. We need to focus on providing supports, financial supports, mentoring, access to capital, especially to students that have a heavy need that can't afford education, regardless to what their socioeconomics are. If they have the genius, then they need to be supported. We need to be able to uplift our next STEM leaders. And then there needs to be continuous feedback loops that happen between education and industry and different verticals in industry, where there are advisory boards and committees and data sharing systems, so educators actually know what skills are emerging in the field that they're in. Most educators hadn't even been in corporate, government, or academia that are in STEM. They've only been in academia. They have never worked in other places to know the need of the workforce. And so while we will never fully solve the pipeline problem, especially not by more memorization, more studying for students, more lectures, or graduates that actually learn in silos. We need to actually raise learners for the future who can actually connect, adapt, bridge, create across domains. This remedy is not less science, it's deeper, more integrated science, plus practice. We must reimagine STEM education, not as a conveyor belt, but as a studio where science is learned through doing, iterating, collaborating, and solving real problems that affect us as humans today. Only then will we reclaim those talented minds that we lose at every turn. So I am going to thank you now for journeying through these thoughts with me because they have been plaguing me and I've been trying to put together my thoughts about them. But I do know I had a book in graduate school and I have all my students read it, even if they're an undergraduate. It says a PhD is not enough. And then it goes through like all these different adjacent alternative careers. And I always say that to my students that your degree is not enough. I know you want it to be enough, but it's not. It's not going to be the thing that wows your employer or your customer if you are an entrepreneur. It's not going to be the thing. And contrary to popular belief, all the people who say, I'm going to be the big boss. Well, the big boss has a big boss, and the big boss has a big boss, and the big boss has a big boss. And no matter who the big boss is, there's still a boss. There's still policies, there's still regulations, there's still things that you have to abide by. So, big boss will always be bossed by something. So, don't feel like you can do it in isolation of community and isolation in general. You do need real time, real world experience to get this done. I am signing off now. I have done my Sunday STEM purge because this has been grinding my gears about the state of the STEM pipeline and why there's not enough understanding of why it's not enough and what is needed in the workforce versus what is being taught in schools. And we've talked about it all. This world driven by innovation still faces this recurring paradox. We teach a lot of science, but too few people can apply it in meaningful, high impact roles. And that is a problem. Our STEM pipeline is leaking and talent is lost, not just at the beginning, but also in the transitions. Theory to practice, school to work, discipline to interdisciplinary. We need to reclaim that lost potential. Will you help me? And if so, tell me how in the comments. What should I be doing? Thanks. You can learn more about me at unitethemetaverse.com. Signing off, Dr. Morris.